Let's get started with part 2 on our series of Return of the Jedi here, and this is about how Return of the Jedi makes no sense from the plot perspective. However, it does hit all of the beats it needs to from the story perspective, and so this movie is a great example in the plot just making no sense whatsoever, but the reason that it did work and continues to work is because it does do what it's supposed to be doing as far as the story goes. That's what we're talking about. In the last video, we went through the rescue sequence of Han Solo from Jabba the Hutt, and now we are leaving Tatooine. Now, when Han, Luke, and Leia, and Chewbacca and the droids fly off from Tatooine, they start to divide. Okay, we've got this idea that the fleet has already started to assemble, and that's where Leia is going with Han and Chewbacca in the Falcon. And then, of course, R2-D2 and Luke Skywalker are in the X-Wing, and Luke says, I've got something else to do, I won't be there. But Leia says, hurry, the fleet's already assembled. So, I'm not sure what Luke is thinking here, because, of course, from the story perspective, we do have to go and have the payoff with Yoda, because in Empire Strikes Back, Luke Skywalker disobeyed Yoda, he went off with incomplete training, and then he got nearly killed by Darth Vader. So he's got to turn around and resolve the situation with Yoda, and of course that's what he's going to do. Now, how is he going to do that? Well, we're expecting him to get more training, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but maybe he's expecting to get more training too, that, he said that he would return in Empire Strikes Back and finish what he started, so he's kind of going back to do that now. This is a weird time for him to do that, because there's obviously some kind of operation going on with the Rebel Alliance against the Empire, and they're all assembling, and you would think that Luke Skywalker would want to be there, and yet he's not. He's going to go off and resolve the situation with Yoda. From the plot perspective, that doesn't make any sense, because if Luke is actually going there to do more training with Yoda and complete being a Jedi, he doesn't know how long that's going to take, and so Luke could be there with Yoda for months or years more, in which case he's going to miss this fight that the Rebel Alliance is about to have with the Empire, and you wouldn't think that he would want that. So, from the plot perspective, if there's going to be this massive battle coming, it would make sense for Luke to go to the Rebel Alliance, participate in the battle, and then when that's resolved, for good or for ill, whatever, then he goes back to Yoda and completes his training. That would make a lot more sense from the plot perspective, but that wouldn't make sense from the story perspective, because the story is going to be over at the climactic battle with the Rebel Alliance and the Empire, and then meeting up in the throne room. Especially with Luke in the throne room with the Emperor and Darth Vader. We're not going to have more story where he then goes and talks to Yoda. So from the story perspective, this has to get resolved now. So that's why Luke is going to fly off to Dagobah, even though, what's he going to do, miss this battle? He must be thinking that. Next, we return to the Death Star, and I really don't think there's that much to say about this scene. We do see the Emperor in person for the first time, seen him in a hologram, but here he is in person, and then we get his orders to Vader, which is going to let us know what's going to be happening, that he wants Darth Vader to bring Luke Skywalker to him in the throne room, so they can both try to turn Luke Skywalker to the dark side because of how powerful Luke has become. And then also you get the idea that the Emperor has been the mastermind behind all of this, because he says, everything is proceeding as I have foreseen. And so you get the idea of his manipulation behind the scenes. Now the scene goes back to Luke on Dagobah in Yoda's hut there. And here we get the resolution with Yoda. Yoda isn't angry with him, whatever, they're coming to resolution together as characters, which is what the story requires, even though from the plot perspective, this is when Luke is evidently learning that he's not going to be here on Dagobah for a while, he's not going to be doing more training, which does, conveniently, from the plot perspective, free him up to go and take part in the battle with the Rebel Alliance. And we get this rather unsatisfying idea that he already knows what he needs to know in order to become a Jedi, he doesn't need any more training, which does seem kind of like a plot hole here, but from the story perspective, we're resolving everything between Yoda and Luke, and then we're also setting Luke finally off to be his own hero, because he does have to do that from the story perspective. We were just talking about how the rescue of Han Solo was trying to show Luke as a hero, and we don't want to reset from the story perspective Luke being a student again here. That doesn't work. He's still kind of tied down in a certain sense because he still has this Jedi Master that he hasn't resolved with. We're going to resolve this issue with the Jedi Master finally, in a final way, because Yoda's about to die, you already know everything you need to know, and now Luke is finally free to become his own man, kind of, and to be his own hero. And so this is a turning point here, and you can see from his story arc why it wouldn't work for him to kind of reset and go back to the training sequences of Empire Strikes Back. It can't from the story perspective, even though we got this weird plot point here. Now, also kind of strangely, what Yoda does here is turn Luke back to go and face Vader, which he did not want him to do at the end of Empire Strikes Back, but now what Luke has got to do is go and confront Vader with presumably no additional training. There must have been some, or from Yoda, obviously, there must have been some stuff that he had learned, obviously, between being on the medical frigate at the end of Empire Strikes Back and then Tatooine, but that's all off camera. And for some reason, from the plot perspective, you got to go and do exactly what I told you not to do the last time you were here. You got to go confront Darth Vader, and that's what's going to make you a Jedi. We also get the revelation here that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father, and then that will lead us to the discussion with Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then the constant back and forth and debates we have as fans about exactly why Obi-Wan lied to Luke in the particular way that he did. I'm not going to get into too much of that. I don't have a problem with Darth Vader being Luke Skywalker's father, and then also there perhaps have been some caginess about exactly the way that Obi-Wan Kenobi was going to talk about that and reveal it. I don't have a problem with that. I have another problem that we'll talk about coming up. Yoda also tells Luke that the Force runs strong in his family. And so that was always a large part of being a Jedi when I was a kid, that you would have different families that were particularly strong with the Force and were particularly known for being Jedi. And that doesn't seem particularly strange when Yoda mentions it here. We've got a very Force-sensitive and Force-strong family. But then later in the prequels, we introduce this idea that the Jedi aren't allowed to get married or have attachments or have children. Well, how in the world can the Force be strong in families if every time you get a Force-sensitive Jedi, you put them on basically a celibate monastic life? It never made any sense. This does make much more sense. I really liked that aspect of the Jedi, Force-sensitive families and things like that was set up, like with this discussion here with Yoda, where nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary about that. Here we have the discussion with Luke Skywalker and Obi-Wan, and where we get into the certain point of view and all of this. And for this single movie, if this arc, we've got this trilogy, I think that works. It kind of does give you some kind of different way about why he might have been cagey, because Obi-Wan says that when I met your father, he was already a great pilot, which to me implies his father is older, not a child pod racer, like I was expecting him to be an adult and a pilot. Now we've got this idea about how old can you be a Jedi, but that really never actually occurred to me here, that you've got this great pilot, the Force is strong with him, Obi-Wan decides to train him, rather than sending him to Yoda. It's Obi-Wan's arrogance that, actually he's not able to train him well enough, and then this stuff happens to Anakin, and he ends up as Darth Vader. So, to me, that works from this arc. It got messed up, I think, in the prequels, with the introduction of Qui-Gon Jinn and all of that. Now, I don't feel like that all played out the way it's being explained here. And so, this works for this 3-movie arc, but it didn't work when we went on. Here we also get the revelation that Leia is Luke's sister. And again, in the context of just these 3 movies, that's okay, but I think that's a weaker revelation than Darth Vader being Luke's father. I'm more okay with that. We're talking about this other or something here. It makes me wonder why we needed it in a certain sense from the story perspective, because it does seem to imply that, hey, if Luke fails, there's a backup. And that was kind of the implication in Empire Strikes Back when Yoda says there is another, which obviously Obi-Wan Kenobi isn't thinking of in that moment. But then here we've got this idea, okay, who was that? And I kind of wonder if it was supposed to go the way of Leia originally, but there really is nobody else for that to be. A female character to be Luke's sister that's already been introduced into the story, because we can't go adding a new character here at the moment, because we're now into this three movie arc, and we're already basically at the halfway point of the final film. You can't add a new character, so if you've got to resolve this arc of, okay, there being another, and the Force is strong in your family, then, okay, it does go to Leia. I think it was kind of a default move, but also from the story perspective, it's going to give us a way to resolve the love triangle between Han Solo, Leia, and Luke, which we've got to do in this movie. In the last half of this movie, we've got to resolve this love triangle. There are a couple of different ways that we go about doing that. One would be the death of Han. if Han Solo were going to die in Return of the Jedi, which is one possible way that it could have gone. If Han Solo was going to die, then obviously Luke and Leia would end up together, and you wouldn't have to introduce the idea of, Leia being Luke's sister or something like that. Just let them be together. But if Han is going to still be around, then we need some other way to resolve this. So this does resolve it. We just put a family tie between Luke and Leia, and then basically Han and Leia will end up by default then, because, we just removed Luke artificially from the equation, and so now it's going to be Leia and Han. Now we go back to the Rebel fleet, and we're going to be explaining what's going on with the Death Star. We've already sent Luke on the previous scenes in Dagobah on a trajectory back to the Death Star and Darth Vader. We're about to obviously have the Rebel Alliance attack on the Death Star, so from the story perspective, we moved both of those character groups who had separated, and we're going to move them back together so they can go on and achieve their goals in the same location to resolve the story. But there's a lot that's going to be talked about here. Because if you thought the non-plan to rescue Han Solo from Jabba the Hutt was ridiculous, well, wait till you get a hold of what's going on with the Rebel Alliance. It's even crazier. Lando has become a general, so we're also bringing Lando together with all of the characters to resolve this final arc here. I don't know why they just hand out, flag officer rank to whoever just walks up, but Lando's got that now. Now, this is a very important visual that's going to help us understand, or rather not understand, what it is that they're about to do. Because it does set up the physical situation between the forest moon of Endor, we've got the incomplete Death Star orbiting it, and then we are projecting a shield from the surface of the moon up around the Death Star. Presumably, I guess the power systems on board the Death Star are not sufficient, or not sufficient yet, not yet operational, to be able to shield the Death Star from within the Death Star. Kind of like a ship would do, a capital ship or any ship has its shields generated from within it. You would think you would also do that here, but we don't. I guess we're using a lot more power and a lot more energy by putting some type of station down on the forest moon of Endor that's going to project this shield all the way up around the Death Star. However exactly that works, which means you've got this tunnel that goes from the forest moon of Endor out to the Death Star. Admiral Akbar explains that this energy shield must be deactivated before you're going to be able to attack the Death Star. Now, that does seem to make some sense if you're going to be hauling this fleet in here to attack the Death Star directly, but it's unclear why he's ruling out, and apparently he has, ruling out the idea that you would be able to fly up that tunnel from the forest moon all the way up to the Death Star without having to go through the shield. Because presumably, supplies have got to get to the Death Star somehow. And you would think, although it's weird later on, but you would think here that, they fly supplies up from the base on the forest moon. And so we could send in a sabotage team or something like that would fly up that tunnel and then go into the Death Star and sabotage it somehow that way. Now, there must be some reason they rule that out. But that seems to be one way that you would attack this. Another way would be to try to completely deactivate the shield and then attack it. The fighters are going to have to fly into the superstructure, attack that reactor inside the Death Star, and that's going to blow it up. So if you wanted to, and you were doing this from the sabotage perspective, then you could commandeer a TIE fighter or other type of fighter that's already there that has the type of armament that's necessary, get saboteurs inside, fly up that, commandeer a vessel, and then fly into the superstructure once you've stolen it. But that's never brought up. General Nadine fills us in on the other half of this plan because, of course, we have stolen a small Imperial shuttle. Now, and then we're going to use the secret code to deactivate the shield. Wouldn't that just be deactivating part of the shield? But anyway, we've got this shuttle with this secret code on it, which is going to enable them to land a strike force on the forest moon of Endor and disable the shield. All right, that's important. But they're going to do it in a completely wonky way. I have always been unsatisfied with what happens to Leia here. I don't think she was done particularly well. She should have gotten a better character arc, because as it's written, there isn't a whole lot for her left to do, especially here in the last half of Return of the Jedi, and I think that was sad. I wish that she had gotten a stronger end to the character arc with these three movies. Because basically, we've just seen the character kind of steadily go down throughout the three movies. Because when we first encounter her in A New Hope, she's basically the leader of the Rebel Alliance. She has a lot of political power, she's got a lot of leadership and command authority, she's basically running things. But then when we get to Empire Strikes Back, it seems to be that she's lost a lot of her operational control of the rebellion. She is still a very symbolic force. She's kind of like maybe a little bit more than a figurehead, but kind of like a figurehead for the leadership of the rebellion. But that a lot of the other operational control she's lost. I mean, think about her in the command bunker on Hoth. I mean, she's there. She's clearly an important person, like seemingly symbolically, but the thing is being run by other people. But then once we get here to Return of the Jedi, the authority of her character has dropped even further to the point where she's just going to be a commando that's going to be on this shuttle going off to the Forest Moon. Like, she wasn't supposed to be that. I would have liked to have seen her maintain her status as a leader of the rebellion and not be treated in such a kind of expendable way as you might, send special forces troops to take care of this. Is that really her role? I mean, I don't think so. That's not what she's shown that she's good at, in the previous films and things like that. She's not a special forces operator. So why is she doing this? They needed her to be there with Luke and Han. You would have had to come up with a different way to do that if she's not going to the Forest Moon. But I would have liked a much better resolution to her character and allowed her to maintain her command and operational control. Luke shows up just in time to join the shuttle. Isn't that convenient that he actually doesn't need to stay on Dagobah for years after all, and so can actually participate in this battle with his friends in the Rebel Alliance? I guess that's convenient for him that Yoda checked out and told him to, that he doesn't need any more training. So he shows up just in time to get with the main characters to continue this battle. I think it's interesting to note here that when they fly up to request activation of the deflector shield, none of them are disguised in Imperial uniforms. That seems to be an oversight in case they wanted a visual communication with the occupants of the shuttle. Right now it's only audio communication, and that's good for them because it works, but don't you think that you would at least be in Imperial uniforms in case somebody, turns on a view screen? Like, I would. This would be a very quick and nonsensical way to blow this operation. Now here is where we really get to it, because we really have to talk about the deactivation of the shield and what exactly it is that they are trying to do here, because we already saw the physical situation when Admiral Akbar was briefing. We've got the shield being projected around the Death Star from the Forest Moon. It does not make sense at all for them to deactivate that entire shield for a parts and technical group inside this small shuttle bringing in some supplies. That seems ridiculous. So why in the world do they need to deactivate the shield? So why do they need to deactivate the shield at all? Besides, he says this is a parts and technical group that is bound for the Forest Moon. You don't need to deactivate the shield to fly to the Forest Moon. You would think there would be a lot of different supply ships and cargo ships and shuttles that are going down to that base on the moon, which is being used to project the shield around the Death Star, and is presumably a very busy hub of activity because it's probably coordinating all of these different supply ships and everything that is flying up that tunnel. I mean, how are they getting supplies to the Death Star to build all of that? Well, you would think there would be just this constant ferry back and forth of supply ships and cargo and everything else that's going back and forth up that tunnel from the Forest Moon to the Death Star. So if you are a parts and technical group, why do you even need to go through this step of trying to deactivate the shield? You wouldn't. You would just fly down to the base. Now, the base may be protected by its own shield, but it wouldn't be protected by the shield that covers the Death Star. So what you would need to do is you need to fly down and request access to the base hangar or whatever, and then fly up the tunnel. But they're not going to try to fly up the tunnel anyway because they're trying to deactivate the shield on the moon. So why are they having to deactivate the shield? It doesn't make any sense. For some reason, they deactivate the shield. Of course, Luke gets jittery, as Han says, about his presence being felt by Darth Vader and that potentially jeopardizing things, but nonetheless, they are cleared, the shield is deactivated for whatever particular reason, and they're told to continue on their present course. Where they go and act as suspicious as they possibly can. Let's say that you think this worked, as they presumably do on board the shuttle. They think we've got a parts and technical group here. We've got some kind of code access. We told them we're going down to the Forest Moon. Where should they go? They should go to the Imperial base on the Forest Moon of Endor, which is the hub of this Imperial activity, and that is, coordinating all of the supplies and parts and technical group, like we were saying, to go up to the Death Star. That's where they should fly. If they want to draw attention to themselves, they should fly someplace else, because that would be where they were expecting them to go. But what do? They go and fly off someplace in the middle of the woods. So if they're being, the shuttle's being tracked, and the shuttle has clearance, where would the Imperials be expecting them to go? To the base, which incidentally is exactly where the rebels want to go. They've got to get to that base in order to deactivate the shield. So if you've managed to pull off the secret code and stolen shuttle and all that kind of thing, why wouldn't you then just fly and land in the hangar and then, of course, be in Imperial uniforms to infiltrate that base and disable the shield, blow it up, whatever you got to do? That would seem to be the obvious thing. If your ruse has worked so far, it's certainly going to not work as soon as you just fly off into the middle of the jungle someplace and go and land. That's highly suspicious activity. Why would you need a parts and technical group to go land in the middle of the forest? You don't. You need it at the Imperial base, which is where they need to go. Why go and land in the woods? It makes no sense. All right, here we are with the shuttle in the background there in the middle of the woods. Why would you land there? I say again, you got everything that you wanted in order to land at the base, which is what they would be expecting. They brought all this camouflage gear, though, like they're expecting to land in the woods, and they didn't bring Imperial uniforms. Why did they do this? This operation is being planned by an idiot. Well, the defenses of the Death Star are designed by Imperial idiots because apparently you have to disable the entire shield around the Death Star in order to get this shuttle to land here in the middle of the woods. If that was the case, as soon as the shield dropped, that's when the Rebel fleet should have showed up and attacked, because they're going to drop the shield to let just this shuttle go land in the woods. So we've got a couple of different ways that this movie could have gone, both of which could have made sense, but we got this weird amalgamation here that makes it make no sense. One way is the stolen shuttle thing with the Imperial codes. You use that, you dress up in Imperial uniforms, you get clearance, and you go right down to the base, and then you try to blow it up with some explosives. Okay, that's one way. And you could have done a really interesting battle sequence and all of that with that kind of plot going for you. Another way is to land way out here in the woods, get on your camouflage, and then go trek across the woods to the Imperial base and try to blow it up, which is what they're taking. If you're doing that, though, you don't need the Imperial shuttle, you don't need the codes. What you do is you say we've got this special type of almost stealth shuttle or something. Maybe it's highly experimental, that's this prototype or something that the Rebel Alliance has got, and they're going to use this shuttle to go and land this strike team out here in the middle of the woods. Because this stealth prototype shuttle is going to be able to evade all of the Imperial defenses that are around the Death Star and searching out for ships that might be trying to do this. So you have them slip through the Star Destroyers and around the fighters and everything like that, going unnoticed. Maybe they're almost noticed, but then they're not, and they manage to land in secret on the forest moon, and then they all get out in their camouflage, and then they make this trek to the bunker. That would have made sense. Putting those two things together doesn't make sense. It just doesn't. Of course, if you go the way this would actually go, if they had landed at the Imperial base and were trying to infiltrate it, you would also get to skip all of the Ewoks, and wouldn't that have just been fantastic? You could have just gotten rid of them completely because you're not wandering through the forest. That would have been great. Now, if you just gotta have some Ewoks, then having them trek through the woods does make more sense, from the perspective of then they can meet the locals and have this Ewok encounter. But you could have saved a lot of time in this movie that could have been used for other things, some people might argue more exciting things or more adult or sophisticated things that are going on inside that Imperial base if you had just skipped the walking through the woods part of this, which should have been done. I guess you would also skip all of the land speeder part with the Imperial troops. And clearly, I would say, if this is the direction that George Lucas wanted to go, which clearly it is because this is the way this whole movie goes, then the easy thing to do to make this actually make some semblance of sense is to, like I said, drop the idea of the stolen Imperial shuttle and have them trying to get onto the moon in some kind of stealth and secretive way. That would have made sense. Then you can have all of the speeder stuff and the shenanigans with the Ewoks and all of that like you've got it here. Jam their comlinks, center switch. How is it that Luke knows how to jam their comlinks using the speeder bike and which switch it is? And second of all, why is it that these bikes have the ability to jam one another's communications anyway? Admittedly, it's handy in this situation for the Rebels, but why would the Imperials have that? And I suppose if the Rebels had gotten a hold of it, but I don't think that's something you would put on a speeder bike. It's weird. It's just a really easy way to escape the obvious thing that the speeder bike scouts would obviously have radioed in that we got some kind of problem, and here's the reason that they supposedly can't, even though it makes no sense. They all bring camouflage, except for they still have C-3PO walking around in all gold. And why are they bringing R2-D2? This seems like the droid that you would not want to bring when trying to travel around in the woods here. I don't really think that he's going to be able to roll around in the woods with all the roots and vines and everything else, but he seems to have no problem. He is an astromech droid, after all. You would think this is not the kind of thing that he would be doing, or you'd find some other way to get him there. It would make more sense if you're going to have him interfacing with the Imperial computers, like he frequently does, to do the storyline where he's going to fly into the hangar of the Imperial base. Then that would be exactly the kind of environment where you would expect an R2 unit to be rolling around, and would be designed for him to roll around in. Now we start the storyline with the Ewoks, and I'm not going to say a whole lot about the Ewok storyline here, because I'm sure I liked them as a kid. As I said in probably the previous video, Return of the Jedi was my favorite of the three movies as a kid. Now it's Empire Strikes Back. I'm sure I enjoyed the Ewoks as a kid, as most people do. Today, I think the Ewoks, like I think most people do looking back, think the Ewoks are a weak part of this, a weak point in this story, especially when they're going to be fighting, as everybody talks about a lot, an entire legion of the Emperor's best troops. There are cute things in Star Wars. We kind of reached our zenith here of the three original films with the Ewoks, and we start their storyline. We end up with more Ewoks here, and we're introducing the idea that the Ewoks think that C-3PO is some type of god. I haven't been commenting too much on the story. We've got some weird plot stuff, a lot of weird plot stuff that's going on we've talked about. But then from the story perspective, I don't think a whole lot's going on here that's contributing to our story. This is still kind of build up to, we're getting to our climax. We've got to resolve everything. Leia's appearance here in the Ewok village has always bothered me, because all of a sudden she's done her hair, she's gotten dressed up in this dress. Like, aren't you on some kind of timetable to get this shield generator destroyed because there's going to be this rebel fleet showing up and attacking? Like, and they sent the squad and said, hey, meet us at, 0300 or whatever, kind of unceremoniously dismissing the rest of the squad so that our main characters can do something. Again, kind of understandable. Don't need all of these extras wandering around, so they go straight to the bunker. While, what are these people doing? Like, Leia's just like doing her hair and has been here for how long? It would have made more sense if Leia was still dressed in all of her camo and stuff, perhaps implying that she hasn't been here for that long. But what did she do? She just hung out here and took a bath and, did her hair and stuff. Like, why? She looks like she's been having some kind of, forest vacation or something, instead of like being on a military special forces mission. I never understood exactly what order C-3PO was telling the story here, because we appear to have the Imperial walkers, I think, on Hoth, but that was explained before the attack on the original Death Star, which Luke blew up. So I was always trying to figure that out as a kid. Exactly what parts of the story is he telling in what order? Now here we have this touching scene between Luke and Leia where there's going to be this disclosure, and they're talking about Leia's mother, and of course Leia does say that she does remember her mother, although she died when she was very young, but she remembers images and things like that, which does not line up with what we see later in the prequels. So here again we have a situation where what I'm constructing in my mind and always had throughout these original trilogy films doesn't line up with what we were later given in the prequels. And of course, this really isn't about the prequels, and we could talk about the prequels in another video, although I don't really feel the need, maybe, but I'm much more of a fan of the original trilogy. But it's this kind of thing, especially as touching and as memorable as this scene was of Revelation, given the disclosure that they're brothers and sisters as it was, why other things that you bring in later don't line up, it just seems weird to me. Okay, so we get the revelation to Leia from Luke that they're brother and sister, and then of course Luke goes off to confront Vader. I think that's where I'm going to leave this video. I think we'll wrap up the analysis of Return of the Jedi in the next video once we really get to the conclusion and we start putting together more story elements, because we've kind of got this stretch here where we're going on this weird plot thing, but we're going along and we're approaching the climax where the movie does do a good job wrapping up everything from the story perspective, which is what we're talking about here, contrasting kind of a poor plot. It's got all kinds of holes in it. Why are we operating like this? But a reasonable story conclusion. So we'll get to that in the next video.